In the early 1900s, Russian civilians suffered, facing unfairly long working hours and poor workplace conditions in farms and factories, as well as political and economic hardships at the time. However, all of that changed in 1917 when the Socialist Bolshevik Party reacted by seizing the Russian Provisional Government in the October Revolution. Once in power, the Bolsheviks worked to build a centralized communist government. They passed a few sets of legislative reforms, but eventually the good times ended as the Soviet Union progressed into dictatorship. Even though the October Revolution was well intentioned, the Bolsheviks succumbed to power and greed. There were some advancements, but all of them were at the expense of the people. This left the common man oppressed and behind, just as they were before. In the early 20th century, Russia was an autocratic monarchy under Tsar Nicholas II of the Romanov dynasty. With the power remaining entirely with the Tsar, the Russian working class, known as the proletariat, were stripped of their
The
rights.
moral economic idea, we work it, we should own it. And that dissatisfaction had gone back since the end of serfdom in the 80s.
Due to these issues, the tensions between the monarchy and the proletariat were building. But the Tsar failed to address the needs of his people, worsening the unrest. In 1914, World War I began. The Tsar's decision to fight in the war exacerbated the Russian situation. Food and resources were being diverted to the soldiers at the front lines, starving the population. Almost 2.5 million Russian soldiers were killed and nearly 4 million captured. This increased the divisions between the working class and the monarchy as the people were extremely unhappy. To motivate the Russian soldiers, the Tsar went to the front lines. This was counterintuitive as the Tsar had a lack of military experience, resulting in major losses in territory and personnel. Along with the war, protests kept occurring due to the continued mistreatment of the peasants. Eventually, the protests in Russia escalated so much that even the Russian parliament, the Duma, lost faith in the Tsar. Because of this, Tsar Nicholas was forced to abdicate in February of 1917. To replace the monarchy, a provisional government was installed under the leadership of Alexander Kerensky. However, the people had issues with the new government as they decided to keep fighting in the war. In response, the people formed a council in Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg. These councils, called Soviets, heavily criticized government actions through public meetings, influencing the people to support the Soviets. In April of 1917, Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Party, came out of exile and returned to Russia. Lenin's motivation was to truly help and to appeal to the Russian commoners. Lenin promised more power to the working class and equal wealth distribution. He painted a world where no major government decision is taken without the consent of the people and a complete rejection of capitalist interests. This was Lenin's call to the people to join the Bolsheviks in their fight against injustice.
What are their long-term goals? What are the means of getting there? Because the means and the ends obviously are connected. And big circumstances are there's a war in 1917. World War I didn't end. They had to deal with that. There is great poverty in the country. It's a majority peasant country, not a worker country. And then comes the Civil War.
In June of 1917, the government led the Kerensky offensive to limit Austro-Hungarian power in Eastern Europe. The offensive initially had some successes, but eventually failed. This sparked the July Days, a massive backlash of unrest supported by the Bolsheviks. In August of 1917, Russian General Lovor Kornilov planned to seize Petrograd, claiming that he was attempting to crush the socialist movement there. Kerensky eventually apprehended Kornilov, marking him as a traitor attempting a coup. This heavily divided the government. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, slowly started gaining more influence in the Petrograd Soviet, and they started forming plans to overthrow the government. On October 25, 1917, the Bolsheviks proceeded to storm the Winter Palace, which was weakly defended. At night, the attack started, and with minimal fighting, the palace was taken over. The revolution had succeeded. The provisional government has been deposed, the cause for which the people have fought, namely the immediate offer of a democratic peace, the abolition of landed proprietorship, and the establishment of Soviet power. This cause has been secured. Long live the revolution of workers, soldiers, and peasants. The Bolsheviks faced a severe amount of opposition and backlash from many, which kick-started the Russian Civil War in 1918, a reaction to the October Revolution. There were two main sides to the conflict: the Red Army, supporting the Bolsheviks, and the White Army, composed of Tsarist and capitalist forces. Even though the White Army had many advantages, including experienced commanders, extensive foreign aid, and a large control over Russia, they lost to the Red Army as they had a lack of centralization and support from the people. In 1922, the Red Army won and established the Soviet Union. However, a consequence of the Civil War was the massive economic crash that followed, causing even more problems. The Bolsheviks, with good intentions, passed the new economic policy to help the peasants. Even though it created some economic inequality, it provided an incentive for farmers to produce more. However, these good reforms stopped when Joseph Stalin, an authoritarian leader, came into power. He unjustly killed many people, created famines, and oppressed the Russians. This worsened the situation even more. The Bolsheviks ended up compromising the welfare of the people for their own power and greed. The hopes of being free from oppression and torture were slowly but surely crushed.
Everywhere in the world, wherever communists took over, there was one common trait, and that is that the individual did not matter. Because the Bolsheviks have nationalized everything. They basically took everything they could take, and people began to starve. There was no fuel, there was no electricity. It was just a nightmare.
The situation is not very different today. Russia is ruled by Vladimir Putin, a dictatorial leader who rules like a tyrant and crushes opposition, like Joseph Stalin and the Romanovs. The same patterns have been observed across the world in countries like Egypt, Syria, and Cambodia, where revolutions have failed to address the plights of the people in spite of the right intentions. This forces us to reflect and analyze the deeper elements of human nature. George Orwell, a famous English writer, describes this in his novella Animal Farm, a satire of the October Revolution. In the novella, the humans are the Romanovs, the pigs are the Bolsheviks, and the other farm animals are the ordinary Russian working class. The creatures outside looked from pig to man and from man to pig. It was impossible to say which was which. Finally, the October Revolution of 1917 was a reaction against a government that oppressed the people. The Bolsheviks declared a revolution claiming to completely reform the social hierarchy and to promote the average working class, but in reality, they just replaced the Tsar and did nothing else. For the people of Russia, nothing changed. They remained where they were, oppressed, mistreated, and undervalued. Sometimes revolutions do fail.